All right. Hello and welcome back once again to another episode of the Hammercast. Jam-packed, fun-filled, all of the stuff that you have come to expect or not expect. Maybe this is your first episode. I don't know. Maybe you're tuning in for Dave Whitley, who is making his fourth, fifth appearance on the show. I don't really recall. It's been a number of
I
times.
don't know either, but if I do one more, if it is the fourth or fifth, maybe I need to get one of those jackets like they do when people host Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I remember one where John Goodman was hosting for his seventh time, and so they gave him like a special jacket, and
Hmm.
he drank Seagram 7. So he said. I mean, it may have been fake, who knows? And there was a really funny opening monologue where he was like, he got to boss everybody around because it was his
Hmm.
seventh time. Yeah, those are the good old days. Well,
Yeah.
folks, we're going to have a very cool program today, particularly because Dave is going to be talking about a lift that I think he deserves a lot of credit for having brought back, which is the bent press. And you might ask yourself, why would you devote an entire show to the bent press? To which I would simply say, shut up and listen, because Dave is going to explain why. And he's also going to talk a little bit about, give you some insight into connecting the bent press with other moves that you know and love, and a good time is going to be had by most. Now, we're going to get this kicked off momentarily, but I also want to remind people, if this is your first show or maybe your 20th and you're just not very good at following directions, then you should get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge to strengthen the rest of your body and, frankly, prepare it for advanced stuff like bent presses and jerks and what have you, because that's really where a lot of the fun part of kettlebell training is building on the basics. And the 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge is going to show you how to forge a foundation so rock solid that you might find that some of your favorite movements, presses, squats, even pull ups, start getting better automatically. This is not hyperbole. A number of people have told this to me about having done some of the very simple moves in this. It can be done with your regular training. So this is not like, you know, start over at square one. This is the sort of a thing you put in either at the beginning or the end or on your in between days for your training, and watch as the gains roll in. So go to 9minutechallenge.com, get your own copy. It is free, and that is the number 9minutechallenge.com. And without further ado, Dave, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here. It's always fun to talk to you.
Pleasure's
And
all mine.
no matter what we're talking about, whether it's bent presses or presidents or kitty cats, it's always fun. And those are things
Absolutely.
that we've covered all of those bases this morning.
Yes, I think we both agreed that we are going to write in our cats for the next election. And so one of our
Right.
cats will be elected. And so may the best cat win. I guess one could be the running mate for the other. It just depends.
Yeah,
But
we could have like Ozzy and Ollie, vice president and president. Yeah,
exactly. I like it. So let's, I know we're a little bit tight on time today, and I want to make sure that we cram as much delightful training goodness into this episode as we possibly can. And because the bent press has come back into fashion, I actually just saw one of our colleagues, Colin Lake, do a 60-kilogram bent press. As we speak, this happened just a few hours ago. I saw this on Facebook. That's like 135 pounds overhead on one arm. And that's impressive by any standard. But I think what's even more impressive is the numbers that people were putting up back in the olden days with this move. Talk to us a little bit about the old school strongmen and their rapport, let's say, with the bent press.
sure. I saw that same video this morning as well, and both commented on it and sent our friend a message because that was good. And it warms my heart to see that happening, especially I was out of the coaching game for a while, been back in for close to a year now as an online coach and stuff. And when I decided to make my return, I was, of course, wondering, is anybody gonna give a crap what I say? Does anyone remember that I was involved in this stuff? And thankfully, yes, the people have been paying attention, but I've been very bent press focused this year. For myself as a personal goal, I have some stuff. We'll talk more about that in a little bit about what my personal goals for that is. But I started, doing things associated with bent presses, and it's really, really funny to me that in this can be told something very kind about my resurrection of the bent press, or like our mutual friend Paul McElroy gave me a huge compliment that said I'm the father of the modern bent press movement, which
Mhm.
just means that I was the one person who was paying attention to it and yelling loud. So,
Yeah.
it's really cool for someone, to hear someone like Paul say something like
Well, that's
that.
what fathers do, right?
Right, right. So but in the same day, someone can say something like that, and then someone can look at a video of something that I'm doing and tell me how every joint of my body's going to explode, that this is a stupid movement, that I'm gay and I'm fat for doing, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the block button exists for. But it's hilarious to me, and an unpredicted benefit of the bent press is that by championing such a movement and putting information out there about my love of it and helping other people to develop it in themselves, I get to practice the awareness of I am neither the greatest thing ever nor the worst thing ever. I'm somewhere in the middle, and people on either extreme are going to say, to say stuff. And you look at like anyone who's made a name for themselves in any area,
Hmm.
and they're going to get the same thing. There are people who are going to think they're amazing. There are people who are going to say that, their house should be set on fire. So, um, that's I'm glad that we're talking about the bent press today, and we'll talk more about this also as we go along. That this weekend, today's April 15th, as we're recording this weekend, I'll be in Austin, Texas, presenting at Belfast, and I'm going to be talking about the bent press and the get up and how those two things tie together. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say this out loud or not, but I'm going to our my friend Peter Neiman. Are you
I I know the name. I can't put a face to it, but I do. I'm like the reverse of most people. They don't know the name,
okay?
but they know the face. I'm like, I know
Yeah.
the name. I don't know. I can't think of the face.
Well, he's done a lot of cool stuff with bent presses in the past few years. I got to meet him at Belfast in Nashville last year, and we shot a few videos. One of them being us doing tandem bent presses, which was really cool if you got a coach's eye, because he's got very long arms relative to his torso, and mine aren't. And so you can see two guys who have found an ideal groove for their body doing the same movement next to each other, and it's a very same but different. Both of them looking as efficient as possible for the individual body types. But anyway, Peter and I are back to back in our presentations, and so we're going to kind of meld it all together,
Nice.
and he's going to bring his insights into it, and I'm going to bring my insights into it, and it's going to be a ton of fun. But I think that one of the reasons that we need to talk about this is like, why does the bent press even matter? If it was something that was so popular and so huge back in the days of the one that everyone's heard about is Arthur Saxon putting officially 375 pounds or 370 pounds overhead with one arm, and possibly 385 officially.
Hmm.
There's rumors of that I've heard from Bill Hinbern, who owns superstrengthbooks.com. You can get all manner of old, late 1800, early 1900 republished books around the physical culture that was going on at that time from his site. And Bill's an amazing guy, and a historian of all this sort of stuff too. But there allegedly was a time that Arthur Saxon locked out 400 plus pounds, but then maybe wasn't able to stand up with it and lost
Hmm.
it, which is just, if you think about it, that's phenomenal. I mean, in our day and age, someone who can deadlift 400 pounds on it is ex top percent of normal people. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you got the outliers like Eddie Hall and Thor Bjornsson and all that, but like just a regular person, you say, hey, can you pick up 400 pounds off the ground? Can you just budget? Can you rack pull it? The vast majority of them won't be able to do it. And here's this guy getting it to his shoulder and putting it overhead with one hand, which is phenomenal. And then there's the early media war between him and Eugen Sandow, which I still am not 100% convinced they weren't working together like pro wrestlers to make that happen,
Very possible.
because everyone benefited from it.
Yeah.
Everybody got paid. Everybody, secured their place in strength history with that event. If it actually happened the way that it played out, where there was like a serious rivalry, then great. If they worked together to do it, then that predates the working aspect of professional wrestling by several decades,
Yeah.
and I choose to believe that it probably was that way. I think that they were both very savvy, especially Sandow. But for anyone who doesn't know, as the legend goes, Sandow, performing strongman, and physique hero of the time, he's the model for the statue that they give out to the winner of Mr. Olympia, Eugen Sandow. He was a master of the bent press, and he was putting up over 300 pounds with one hand. And his declaration was, "I am the strongest person in the world at this lift. Open challenge, no man can beat me at it." And it was a pretty hefty sum of money for the day too, like 100 British pounds or something like that, which, it'd be like what, 50 or 100 grand now. It was pretty sizable. And Saxon allegedly, and if I get any of these facts wrong, it's purely my memory. Saxon allegedly showed up at a show and said, "No, you're not. I can do it," and went up and did it. And that started the rivalry
Hmm.
because, it was, "No, you didn't do it exactly the same, blah, blah." So there was like this back and forth thing that really plays out like, if you understand pro wrestling, it plays out like a pro wrestling script. Really, really cool.
Hmm.
Um, but then there were the other folks that are maybe a little less known, like Sig Klein, who he wrote a book called, or an article called "How Much Can You Bent Press" for Strength and Health magazine in 1936. And I'm going to read a quote from him. He says, "I believe that the greatest mistake weightlifters have made is their ignoring of the bent press." So people were already overlooking it 90 years ago.
Yeah.
There's no lift that calls forth more of the admiration of athletes as does this lift. It is more fascinating in the 40 odd lifts that men have been practicing for the past 50 years. I've done enough with the bent press to know what marvelous bodybuilding possibilities there are in this lift. It develops practically every muscle of the body, requiring not only strength in the muscles of that lift, but strength and suppleness in nearly all other parts of the body to maintain balance. And that I actually lifted that quote, put it in my book, Taming the Bent Press, and I'm like, this is why it's important, because over the past 100 plus years, as physical culture evolved into gym culture, evolved into whatever, the influencer culture now, um, people have been constantly searching for a way to make things safer, is the intention. And what they wound up doing is making things less effective, because bodybuilding went from its weight lifting. I don't mean Olympic weightlifting. I mean the lifting of weights, the 40 odd lifts that he talked about. It went from that, physical culture um, gave rise to bodybuilding as, this is how I look on stage and nothing else matters.
Hmm.
And we get people like, Dorian Yates and Arnold and Ronnie Coleman, which is great. I'm fascinated by that sport. I have no interest in it because I like food too much. Um, then, of course, Olympic lifting and powerlifting, and then performance-based strongman stuff, modern competitive strongman, they all have their roots in that. And if we go back and look, we've got this guy who was, basically the Joe Weider of his time. Sig Klein was super well known and along with Thomas Inch, for propagating physical culture. And he's saying people are already forgetting about this lift, and it does all these things. And if we look at the evolution since then, in the past 90 years, there were no Smith machines. There was no adductor abductor machine for the inner thigh, and seated calf raise for the soleus of the calf. And so the bodybuilding aspect that evolved out of it turned it into muscle isolation. And that was done primarily for athletes who were training to look a specific way. And if you talk to the average person, they will equate bodybuilding with fitness. They will equate muscle size with muscle strength. They'll equate low body fat percentage and or visible abs with being healthy and strong. And those, they're there's a relationship between those things, but they're not dependent on each other. It's more of a, what's that saying? Correlation doesn't equal causation. It all comes from the same root, but the branches are different. And so we're at a point now where we're on one tree of physical fitness, physical culture, physical exercise, whatever you want to call it. And I'm on this limb over here on the west side of the tree, and I'm making fun of the people who are over there on the leaves that are on the east side of the tree, because they're growing differently, but
Yeah.
ultimately it all comes back to the same thing. So the bench press is so important because it fell out of the groove, or fell out of popular fitness culture, because honestly, it's a difficult skill to master. It's a difficult skill to put into practice if you don't have someone to help guide you. And if we back up a step from there, in the way that I approach it personally, I use the get up as the basis for not only the bench press, but for all grinding movements,
Hmm.
except maybe the squat. All overhead work comes out of the get up for me. I see lots of form check type things on various different social media outlets. How's my press look? Your press is okay, but you're clean. You don't know how to do it.
Hmm.
And I think that we've gotten to a spot now that the get up and the bent press both, they're a little bit um, intimidating because there's a learning curve there. There's not as much of a learning curve in people's minds to just putting your hand over your head, but to lay on the floor and go through all the steps to stand up in the standard way that I teach it, or to get in position to do the bent press, it seems dangerous and seems scary. And there is a little bit of danger and scariness involved in that, but that's I've seen people get hurt on the Smith machine too. Way worse than I've ever seen anybody get hurt in a bent press. So the fact that we have this documented history of how effective it is for the body, both the get up and the bent press, and the fact that they interrelate to each other. Like for example, when I'm working with a new person, we'll start with swings and get ups. Those are the two foundational things. And the very first branch off the get up tree that I do is to learn how to do the rack position. Because if you don't know how to do a good rack position, and by know, I don't mean intellectually see it and know that's a rack position. I mean, if your body and your nervous system cannot access a rack position without conscious thought, you don't own it.
Hmm.
It's not a part of your movement pattern, and it should be as as simple and as integrated into the body as walking or drinking a glass of water.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know where the rack position is, then we go to the idea that the clean is a swing that ends in a rack position. Um, but where's the rack position? Well, I don't know. Well, you barely know how to swing and you don't know what a rack position is, and you're going to try to clean and press. Those things don't match up. I'm not going to be able to do integers in calculus if you don't know. Okay, you understand numbers and you understand addition and subtraction. Great. Do you understand multiplication? No. Teach me calculus. It just doesn't work that way. We have to build off that foundation. And if we look at some of the things that some of the old timers were able to do, there's at least 20 people that you could look up right now that were around 100 years ago that were putting 300 pounds over the head with one hand.
Hmm.
And these were not big men either. Saxon was probably one of the biggest, and he weighed about 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And so when you see people that are putting double body weight almost overhead with one hand, there's something to pay attention to there.
Yeah.
And I also recently got chastised because it's a circus trick. It's not really a lift. It's a circus trick. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go look at circus performers and tell me that what they're doing is an actual skill and doesn't require actual strength. Go do some trapeze work or some acrobat stuff and tell me that that's not real athleticism.
Yeah.
So the idea that it would happen in a circus, I'm yes, you're right. It is a circus lift. But the idea that it's a trick somehow implies that it's not real. And the only people that I've ever seen that do that are the ones who can't do it.
Yeah, not only that, they can't do anything.
Right.
I've run into a lot of those people myself, not so much for the bent press, but for other things. And yeah, I think the less familiarity you have with it, the quicker you are to just completely dismiss it. And I think in the case of people like that, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And one other thing that I'll point out too, just in terms of the bent press, I think even John Grimmick, this was like it would have been in the
Mhm.
1940s, between the 30s and the 50s, let's say, he
Mhm.
could do a roughly 300-pound bent press. So even into
Mhm.
the 1900s, like not that like within living memory, there were people putting up that kind of weight. And I think the really big difference is that you think about what we incentivize in terms of training and what we're trying to get good at, and it becomes pretty clear that whatever the stuff that we're incentivizing is the stuff that we're doing. So like if you look at I remember once Steve Maxwell pointed out that one of the reasons that Americans aren't dominating at Olympic weightlifting is because nobody cares about it. Like they dominate it, in other countries because they prioritize it, whereas the guys with a good concentration of type 2 muscle fibers, of fast twitch muscle fibers, going into American football, and they're going into stuff that people really want to spend a lot of time and money on. And I think when it comes to strength training, like you pointed out, there were already people 90 years ago who were discounting the value of the bent press, and people were just slowly moving away from it. So I don't think that human development has changed so much that we can't achieve these things anymore. It's just our minds have wandered in different directions. And the other thing I'll say is I don't remember who said it, but it might have been Bob Hoffman. Um, Somebody said, "Show me one man who wants to lift like Sandow, and I'll show you 100 men who just want to look like him." And so there was already a market for people who just wanted a certain look, and they
Hmm.
didn't want all the strength that went along with it. And so I think the fragmentation that we see in from at one point it was like you would do anything you needed to get strong. So there was gymnastics and body and barbell lifting and kettlebell lifting, and then eventually the split into just bodybuilding for the sake of bodybuilding, and then the barbell lifts, and then the barbell lift split into powerlifting versus Olympic lifting, and then kettlebell training went from the odd lifts into kettlebell sport into so everything fractured more and more, and it's my hope that things are starting to kind of recoalesce the way that they used to be, and that people are going to start trying to put as many of these different things together and get as good as they can at a variety of different things and watch as that all builds one on top of each other. And it seems like that just dovetails perfectly into the get up into bent press methodology that you've put together.
Yeah, and the get up too is a phenomenal thing. I mean, to me, they sort of occupy the same space.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've said before something to the effect of the bent press finish is what the get up starts if we
Yeah.
pay enough attention to it. Um, but the get up, I, I see in the internet that there's a lot of meh around the get up
Mm-hmm.
from certain folks who they want to get straight into double kettlebell complexes, and those things are great. I love those things. I use them with myself, with people that I work with, but the get up has a special kind of magic that is difficult to understand until you've done it for a while and actually experienced the results. And again, the learning curve is there. It's like when you first attempt to do a get up, you're like a little baby trying to figure out how to walk. You stand up, you fall on your butt, and you can decide then, okay, this walking thing's not for me. Mom, pick me up, carry me, and then that doesn't really work out very well. But if you put the effort in and put the time in to develop the awareness that goes along with it, you reap the benefits. And I had literally yesterday on a coaching call, had a new client that I'm working with who I go way back with. We've known each other for years, and he kind of got out of it. And then a couple of weeks ago, we reconnected, and he's like, I need some help. And so I started working with him. And one of the first things I did was like, go back and remember how to do get ups. And so after 2 days, he's like, I already feel better, like I'm moving better, and everything feels tighter, like I'm moving more like a more cohesive unit
Mm-hmm.
after just a couple of sessions with get ups in them. So it's a beautiful thing. And if like we used to say um, in Strong First, Pavel was known for saying that the kettlebell swing is the Sanchen kata of that system. And
Mm-hmm.
for anyone that doesn't know, Sanchen kata is a form. It's the first form that is taught in many Okinawan karate systems. There's I don't know how many different variations or different like family lineages there are of Okinawan karate systems. There's a bunch. The Sanchen Kata, which I believe goes back to mainland China to White Crane and Praying Mantis Kung Fu, because they both of those systems have a 3-step forward or a 3-step arrow form, and Sanchen
Mhm.
Kata means 3 battles or 3 steps or something like that. But there's variants of all that. And so the idea there being that the swing is the root from which all of those other things grow, just like Sanchen Kata is the root from which all those different expressions of martial style grow. And I thought about that a lot, and I still agree with it to this day. But the flip side of that coin is, if the swing is the Sanchen Kata, then what is the get up? And I started thinking about this years and years ago. I got obsessed about the get up, and I was looking at different expressions, different lineages of yoga practice. And anyone who's done any research into yoga practice is familiar with the idea of a sun salutation. And
Mhm.
I saw that that showed up in several different places. And I'm like, okay, so maybe the get up is the sun salutation. And I started looking more into sun salutation. I'm not a yoga guy. I'm not a yoga teacher, but I've read some stuff, and I know that there's, maybe it's Iyengar. I'm not sure which yoga system it is. They start with a very, very fundamental version of a sun salutation, and then they start adding elements to it. And there's maybe 8 or 10 different variants of it, but it all circles back to that same root. I'm like, okay, so with the get up, we can find the rack position in it. We can press from 7 or 8 different positions. We can move the elbow and hinge the hip and internally and externally rotate shoulder joints and move the head around. There's all these different things that we can do once we understand that basic wireframe of what the get up looks like. And so everything sort of springs forth from that. And I'm on my get up ramble now. So all that to say, the one of the most important things that the get up does is lay the foundation for proper overhead pressing, whether
Mhm.
that's military pressing, push pressing, jerks, side press is what I call the natural press, which is a term I picked up from Bud Jeffries, and of course the bent press.
It's amazing. Yeah, I remember going
And so
through
there's
I was just gonna just interject this. I remember going through all of those movements at the first ever, I have to brag a little bit, the first ever flexible steel, where it was you and John Ingham teaching together in Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul
mhm.
in 2012. And I was amazed I had never looked at them like that before. To me, they were all different movements. And I remember walking away thinking, wow, you could just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger at all of these things by focusing on the commonalities between them, as opposed to treating them all as like completely separate and barely related lifts.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you spend enough time studying it and practicing it and observing other people do it, a pattern starts to emerge and elements of commonality start to emerge. And I wrote about this in the Taming the Bent Press book at Belfast this weekend. This is going to be core to what I'm going to be talking about. And I actually have a little PDF that I've been giving away to folks. So if we put this on your um, various social media outlets, I'm
Oh, hang on, you just muted yourself by accident. There we go. Give us that one more
what was the
time.
last? Yeah, what was the
The
last thing you heard me say?
social media outlets, and then it was like totally
Yeah,
muted.
so wherever this yeah, because I was trying to pull up the link to the PDF, but
Oh,
wherever this talk that we're having winds up with your and my social media outlets, I've got this little PDF of a summarization of what I call the 7 anchor principles. They're applied to the bent press, but most of them we can apply to the get up and to the other grinding movements as well. That's
nice.
going to be the foundation of what I'm talking about at Belfast this weekend, and I'm happy to like briefly talk about each one of them
Let's do it.
if you're up.
Sure.
All right. The first one is practice. Practice is the key to mastery, and I'm a big fan of challenging the phrase practice makes perfect. I don't think practice makes perfect. I think practice makes permanent. So,
Mhm.
whatever we're practicing, we're getting better at doing that. So, if we're practicing in a way that is not optimal, we're getting better at doing it wrong. I
Yeah.
very rarely use the words wrong because I think that right and wrong exist on a continuum when it comes to movement practice.
Yeah.
But if you practice wrong, you get better at doing it wrong. You get stronger and wronger longer. So that's true not only to get up in the bench press, but for any movement that we're doing. Like if we practice a movement, we get better at it. Practice supersedes sets, reps, loads, um, any programming variants where we up wave in the volume or the loads, any of that sort of stuff. We treat it as a practice, and if we do that, we get better at the skill itself. For get up and bench press, very specific. This is part of the practice is keeping the eyes on the weight.
Mm-hmm.
Our body tends to follow our head, and our head tends to go where the eyes go. So if I'm in the middle of either bench press or a get up and I stop looking at the weight and I look down toward the floor, look over at something that's happening over there, that weight tends to want to follow it. And because physics being what it is, the weight being away from my center of gravity, I can hold 48 kilos overhead with no trouble. If I bring it out 15 degrees to the side, it's going to fall because Sir Isaac Newton had it right the first time. So that's not my rule. Blame him for it, right? So keeping the eyes on the weight, um, looking at it keeps you aware of what it is, but it also encourages in the bench press a better rotation as we're going into the bending part.
Mm-hmm.
Another physics tip, the third one is keeping your forearm or keeping your forearm vertical and your wrist straight. If the forearm comes off vertical, then we have that same problem that I just talked about. And with a kettlebell, it's interesting because sometimes vertical isn't vertical. If the weight's heavy enough, we have a combined center of gravity where the arm itself isn't vertical. The arm will maybe lean away from the center of mass of the kettlebell a little bit so that the center of the kettlebell is over the elbow or over the shoulder joint. And that's where vertical actually lies in relation to gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that gives way to the next anchor point, which is create a structural column of support so that we're not trying to muscle the weight the entire time. Muscle and strength is vital, but having the bones stacked underneath is more important than for the development of the skill, which then gives way to the muscular strength. And that's just a continuation of the idea. If my arm's overhead, I want to build a column of support with my entire body underneath it. So if I'm in the bench press rack position, this hand will go to this elbow, will go to this hip, will go to this leg, down to that foot. And then as I go into the bend, that vertical line shifts a little bit towards the other foot in most folks. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm still creating this structural column so that I'm able to utilize my strength as I am supporting the weight. The next step that is true for all overhead work is packing the shoulder. And what that means is keeping the scapula depressed and retracted. So I don't want to shrug up and I don't want to let my shoulder roll forward. I want my left shoulder blade intention to be put it into my right hip pocket and vice versa. We sometimes will hear that referred to as shortening the X on the back that goes between the shoulder blade and the opposite side glute. Then for the bench press itself, there's the freehand position. I see a lot of pretty strong people that could be stronger if they understood how the freehand position plays into it, because the hand that isn't loaded isn't just floating around out there in the very skilled lifters. If you go and look at photos of Arthur Saxon or Edward Aston or Thomas Inch or any of those guys from back in the day, they were very intentional about where that freehand went. And for me, for beginners, there's two different positions that I recommend everybody choose one of those two and build it from there. And that is to, for most folks, it's, let's say the weight's in the right hand. I'm going to take my left hand and attempt to get it onto my right knee, and my left elbow will be against my left knee.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps me from, wandering around figuring out trying to figure out what to do. I'm giving this hand a job so that it's not like reaching to touch the ground. If you touch the ground with that hand, you've created a lot of problems that a heavyweight will not be conducive to.
Yeah.
And then the final one is, and the second hand position is a little more difficult to get, but it's taking this forearm of the unloaded side and putting it on the loaded on the thigh on the same side, so that we're in that bottom position. The elbow is bent, the hand's against the chest, and the knee is sort of in the armpit. And the benefit to this, I figured this out from looking at photos of Arthur Saxon. The benefit to this is if it's a really heavy weight, I now have this free hand against my unloaded side leg, which is supporting everything, and I can push with my hand against the top of my knee as I'm going to stand up. And then it's not just a sort of a diagonal deadlift anymore. I'm able to move more weight doing it that way.
Nice.
But I recommend everybody do the reach across the other knee first to be able to access that position, because getting the arm in the right position the other way, it takes a little practice. It takes a little figuring things out. And
Absolutely.
then the last one is whatever you're doing, is make it look natural, make it look smooth. And I've said this many, many times. You and I are definitely in agreement on this. When the biggest compliment, or one of the biggest compliments that can be paid as a strength performer, is for someone to come and say, "Man, that was amazing. You made it look easy."
Yeah.
When I see you do stuff like handstand push-ups or the various pull-up things that you do that pop up on my YouTube feed and on my social media stuff, I'm like, man, he makes that look easy. It looks so smooth and so good. And I think that's part of it. So
Absolutely.
those are the anchor points. We got practice, keeping your eyes on the weight, keeping the forearm vertical and the wrist straight, building that structural column of support, packing the shoulder to keep it safe and strong. What's the free hand doing? Give it a job, and then make it look easy.
I love it. I love it. Now, where can people follow you if they're not going to be able to make it to Belfast as of the time of this recording? Where can people find you and follow you online?
The various social media outlets, all the usual suspects. I'm on Instagram as Iron Tamer. I'm on TikTok as Iron Tamer. Of course, on Facebook as Dave Whitley. So if you just look for me there, and you can find me there. You can also go to oldtimestrongmanuniversity.com and access me there. IronTamer.com is a thing, but that website is a little bit dated. It's for my speaking and performing, not my coaching. So the best way is just on social media at this moment.
Nice. Nice. Well, I'm going to include a link to
And
both of
also
those.
for
Yeah.
yeah, I have to say this too, for Belfast this weekend. I'll send you a link, and if you use the code that I send Dave 30, you get 30% off.
Nice.
So I will hook you up. And anybody
Fantastic.
wants a PDF where I explain those anchor points, holler at me. I got you.
Fantastic. Folks, use your tax return to go to Belfast. You treat yourself, all right? Now is the time more than ever. Dave, thank you very much for being on the show.
I appreciate it.
And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.